Hi everyone, Bassthany Boost Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of the new Floating Points and Pharoah Sanders record, Promises, featuring the London Symphony Orchestra. This is a collaboration between not one, not two, but kind of three amazing names in the world of music. One, Samuel T. Shepard, aka Floating Points, a UK electronic music producer whose short but eclectic discography is known not just to cover IDM and progressive electronic music, but also classical and jazz as well. Two, saxophonist Pharoah Sanders, one of the true living legends of jazz, has played with numerous greats across his career and is mostly known for his contributions to spiritual jazz. So through some amazing alignment of the stars, these two have crossed over and then decided a pivotal tool to help their collaboration flourish would be the London Symphony Orchestra. And of course, it's been released on the record label that David Byrne started in the late 80s to release Brazilian and Latin music that he was obsessed with at the time, as well as his own solo stuff. And yes, the label has dropped a ton of great music in a variety of genres over the years. I just thought this was something that you should know. So yes, on Promises, what we essentially have is a very unlikely cross-section of figures creating a meditative, multi-movement new jazz piece with an orchestral twist. And let me specify that one more time. We have one piece on this record going through multiple movements. I point that out because this piece moves through what is essentially the same cycle of chords for its 47-minute runtime, but breaks this progression up with different instrumental palettes and movements over this theme. So for one movement, the keys may be more prominent, for another the sax, for yet another the strings. True to Sanders' spiritual jazz roots, it's pretty entrancing. In other words, it's a vibe. But it's also more than that. Often in my reviews, I will cite instances on a song, on a section of a song where there's a lot of movement, a great progression. But what can also be great is when a piece of music has an alluring stillness to it, a sense of place. Artists who achieve this tend to hang more in the ambient and experimental realms, but not always. And there are points where Promises does throw caution to the wind, but for the most part, this is a very stable composition whose magic is displayed through these immensely beautiful instrumental shifts that I think will woo nearly any music listener. There's also a cleanliness, a clarity, a pristine quality to the sound of this project, which I sort of expected given the London Symphony Orchestra tie-in, but it doesn't take away from the heart and the soul of the piece, in my opinion, and for the most part complements the more electronic aesthetics of the piece too. The whole thing kicks off with this beautiful first movement that works in two parts, essentially. An introduction to the foundational chords of the piece, repeating them to the point where the listener may feel like they're being just brought into a lull, a sense of serenity or familiarity. And then Pharoah Sanders begins running through an expressive, passionate sax solo for the next 5 minutes. I know this is just the first step of the record, but between these glossy keys and Sanders' coarse but dynamic sax playing, this is a sound I just want to be lost in. Even at this point, there is a weightlessness and a vastness to Promises that puts me in a state of just feeling like I'm spinning through a starry open space. I don't know what is up and what is down. The introduction of strings and electronics make the next couple of shorter movements in this piece melt into each other nicely. The core musical theme of the piece remains strong and clear and constant. Meanwhile, Shepard and Sanders and the orchestra are subtly diversifying the instrumental palettes. Movement 4 of the piece brings on some oddly intimate humming and vocalizations for a moment. It's interesting how this changes up the vibe of everything so instantaneously, because everything of it so far feels so isolated, but there's kind of like a warmth to that moment that just makes it feel not so lonely. The fiery sax playing that comes later in this particular movement is a lot darker, relies on deeper, heavier tones. This smoothly transitions into movement 5, which gets a little chaotic. It's like everything we've been hearing up until this point, but the chaos of the previous movement has brought all of these elements up to a boiling point. There's more blending and bleeding and volatility. I feel like I'm listening to the musical equivalent to a chemical reaction. All of the elements here are turning into a steamy soup of sound. On movement 6, much of the bass instrumentation flushes out to really give a spotlight to the strings. There are some heavy, immense, dense passages of music on this one that I love. The bright orchestral arrangements really do make for a climactic moment. Movement 7 tones things down for some spacey ambient electronics that cycle into infinity. Then we get a radical but simple change on the 8th movement where pretty much everything is replaced with a very dirgy organ. But the isolation of the organ in this spot does allow for creative musical embellishments on the chords we've been hearing so far. In many ways, the 9th and final movement of the piece is even more low-key. You can tell Shepard and Sanders are really trying to ease us out of this experience. The orchestrations come back, it's very delicate, it's quite cinematic, and in a nutshell, that is the piece. That is Promises, and it's quite lovely. It's really one of the best musical experiences I've had this year. There are some movements I think could have used a bit more variation, but as is, the mix, the instrumentation here is gorgeous, is immaculate. The whole experience, again, is truly meditative and entrancing. And creatively speaking, this project is a cool cross-section of jazz, electronic music, and classical, without any one of those elements being to the detriment of the other. Feeling a light to decent 9 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, music forever.